So I've talked a little bit about common fears and phobias that people have and how people with those issues, normally they're pretty normal. They're actually okay. There's not anything really seriously wrong with them. This time I want to talk a little bit about irrational fears, extreme fears that don't have much of a rational basis and can actually be crippling. Now, this first one that I'm going to talk about, germophobia, can range from being reasonable to abnormal and a little odd, or it can also be extreme and crippling. And I talked to a friend of mine about this the other day, about germophobia among African Americans, black folks. And we've seen this many times, how a lot of times they will go to rather extreme measures to protect themselves from getting infections. Things like carefully lining toilet seats and picking up finger foods with napkins and various things like that. I remember one time I was on a work assignment for General Dynamics, the telecommunications division in Nashville, Tennessee. And a black coworker and I were staying in a very nice motel. Just one room, but one of the nicest motels that I had ever stayed in up to that point. And mine was sparkling clean. You know, the bathroom, everything about it was just very clean, very nice. The bathrooms were actually sparkling. But this guy, when it came to his room, he was actually concerned about the bathroom, about the toilets and the bathtub, and talking about all these precautions he was taking. And I've seen that a lot among African Americans, to the point that it makes me wonder what some of those people are doing. What are they doing, or what do they know about that is so profoundly nasty that they have to be so extremely careful? And another time I worked with this African American woman, and she functioned pretty well on her job, but she talked about going to some eating establishment. I can't remember where it was, and the person who served her food happened to be barefoot. And this lady just went ballistic over that, which is actually kind of strange, because that is not a risk to anyone unless they have open wounds or some rare disease like leprosy. You know, a server being barefoot, as I am right now on this nice nylon 6.6 carpet, and I often am in the office facility area of our building, not just me, but people tend to do that in our carpeted areas, and it's not really a risk to anyone, as I said, unless they have, you know, open wounds or some weird disease like leprosy or flesh-eating bacteria. People going barefoot is not a risk to you. And so that was a little odd. But germophobia can also be, those examples are a little odd, but germophobia can also be very extreme. There used to be this television series called Monk, and it was about a San Francisco police detective who had to leave his job because his germophobia was so extreme. And then he became an independent consultant to the police department, and apparently made very good money because he had this nice place to live and was able to pay a full-time assistant. But the show, I guess, had an interesting premise to start with, but as things progressed, you saw this guy fear of germs, his germophobia was so extreme that I can't imagine how anyone that bad off could actually function. I mean, it just got ridiculous, and I won't go into all the ridiculous examples, but it really got extreme. Now, I want it understood that I'm very much in favor of good hygiene, hand washing, hand sanitizers, and all that stuff. Of course I would be, because I almost died from bacterial meningitis one time. And I don't like, besides that, I don't like colds and upper respiratory infections. And, you know, a lot of infectious diseases, more often than not, infections travel like this, from your hand to your nose or your mouth. That is the route for most infections. So I'm very much in favor of hand washing and hand sanitizers. But germophobia can actually go as far as that guy Monk, and be so bad that it can actually be disabling. And that is a real problem. That is abnormal. The ones I mentioned before, like you see in a lot of the African American community, are kind of odd, but germophobia can also be extreme. Once again, I'm strongly in favor of hand washing and hand sanitizers and good hygienic practices that can actually affect you. And other people being barefoot isn't going to affect you as far as getting diseases normally. That's a very, very, very low risk. So that's not something that people should be offended by. Now, there are other extreme fears that people can have and be completely irrational about. I know this one person who has 3 very extreme fears. Now, I don't want to downplay the risk of cancer. She has cancer phobia, but I don't want to downplay the risk of cancer because the threat is very real. Who among us hasn't known of someone who has died or have their lives seriously damaged by cancer? The risk is very real for most people, sad to say, and it's a horrible disease. But this person went to a hospital emergency room one time and had some tests done for a problem that she was having, and the doctor said that she needed to be a specialist because there were several things that could cause this problem, including cancer. Cancer could be one of them, so she needed to see a specialist and get screened to find out. And this person immediately comes unglued, just has a complete nervous breakdown, starts asking the doctor if it's early stage or late stage or what it is, and she goes around telling people that she's been diagnosed with cancer in the emergency room, which doesn't happen. And then she went through a series of tests, and they were all negative, but every time she had a procedure or a test, she would just go completely unglued and be crying and just terribly, terribly upset, and one of her doctors actually told her she had cancer phobia. So her fear of cancer was so bad that it was actually disabling, but that wasn't the only fear. This isn't the only fear that this person that I know of has, this very unbalanced person. She's also afraid of birds, afraid that she's going to be kidnapped by birds. And I'm not just talking about powerful, parrots and eagles and hawks and such birds as that. I'm talking about blue jays, sparrows, cardinals, just an extreme fear of birds. And that is completely irrational. She's been non-functional because of that. She also has had another extreme fear of being targeted by the mafia. Fear of organized crime, that somehow the mafia was going to come get her and kill her or something like that. And there is no reason at all that this person would ever be of any remote interest to organized crime. But I'll tell you where that fear came from. She was dating, actually had a live-in boyfriend who, I guess as a control mechanism, told her that he worked for the mafia and had witnessed murders. This guy claimed to be part or be employed by the New Orleans mob, the Marcello crime syndicate. No. Someone who actually wouldn't be talking about it, because if they did, they would put their own life at risk. And so that was just completely implausible. And yet for years, this person went around, this extremely unstable, rather pathetic person, went around looking over her shoulder and crying and complaining and talking about how scared she was that the mafia was going to get her and kill her. This person is so mentally unbalanced that she had to go on Social Security disability. And those aren't the only problems that she had, but the point I want to make was that her fears were very extreme. These are completely different types of fears, germophobia when it's taken to an extreme, and these other ridiculous fears, than the ones that I mentioned. One of them that I mentioned, fear of needles, for example, that's more normal. It actually does have a rational basis, and it's not going to destroy a person's life if they actually do pass out from a shot. That's just a temporary situation they'll be over with in, say, half an hour or so. But some people do have very extreme fears that impact their life in negative ways. Now, what can be done about that? Well, I must tell you that from what I know of the counseling profession, I don't think too much of it. I think that most professional counselors simply don't know what they're doing, and you hear stories all the time of people in and out of rehab, and it doesn't work, and sometimes they commit suicide anyway, and it's just a very dicey field. You know, psychology is a science that there are a lot of competing theories. That's what psychology consists of, a lot of competing theories, people with different viewpoints, and they use different therapeutic methods, and they don't work particularly well. In my opinion, I actually think that most of those people don't know what they're doing. So all I really know for people with very extreme fears is that they should talk to a primary care physician and maybe get some antidepressant drugs or anti-anxiety drugs. And then if they have some trusted friends who can be supportive, they might talk to them about those fears and maybe gain some insight that way. Or they might also try some alternative medicines, Chinese medicine, acupressure, acupuncture, reflexology, meditation, and some of those things. But I don't have a strong opinion of the counseling profession. I think that a lot of times is just a lot of hooey. And actually the standard treatment for a lot of mental problems is antidepressant drugs and anti-anxiety drugs, and in extreme cases it could also be shock therapy, which isn't nearly as bad as it sounds because they get sedated, anesthetized before it's done, and so it's not nearly as bad as people think it is. But I mention all this just to show you that some fears, common ones that people often have, actually do have a rational basis. And in those cases, people should not judge themselves too harshly, and nor should anyone else. The proper response is kindness and support and accommodation, and those fears may actually subside with some of those help, but a lot of them, they actually are normal. But then there are those others that are so extreme and completely abnormal. It's a big difference. It's a big difference between normal fears and abnormal fears, and I just wanted to highlight those differences. Now, I will say, if anyone out there has an issue with some of these more normal fears and they would like to discuss it or dialogue it, that's fine with me, because sometimes people just need to be told they're okay. You can hear that from doctors and nurses in every hospital everywhere, that sometimes people just need to be told that they're okay, and sometimes they just need to get a little bit of support. And I don't actually expect to hear from anyone, but, you know, if for some reason someone wants to dialogue because they think that this information or point of view is helpful, that is certainly available. It would not happen most likely on Messenger. It'd probably be text and email, and you might have to wait for a response. If you want a response quickly, you could post on my timeline that you had sent me an email, but I'm certainly willing to dialogue about this should someone want to. I often post information that I think might be useful or helpful in some way. And if someone wants more information or more discussion, they're certainly welcome to do that. I do welcome non-hostile or non-provocative communications from people, as long as we keep it simple and it doesn't become anything hostile. So in that instance, if someone wants to discuss it, they could send an email or a text, or they could mention that they had sent it on my timeline. But there you are. There are differences in fears and phobias. Most of us have things that do frighten us, and a lot of those have a rational basis, and that is basically okay. And the way to respond to that is with kindness and support. Other people, however, do have fears that are completely unbalanced and irrational, and that might require antidepressants, anxiety drugs, talking with friends, or possibly some alternative medicine. So there you have it. Irrational fears as opposed to rational. Some do have a rational basis, others can be quite extreme, and there's a significant difference between the two. Have a very good day.